This past week, Dina and I attended the Toronto prayer breakfast. And at that breakfast, I heard a very disturbing statistic. And this is a statistic. Toronto is considered the loneliest city in Canada. Think of that. Toronto is considered the loneliest city in Canada. And this is not a reputation that we want to be known for, but what can be done to change our reputation for being a place of so many lonely people? Do we as a Christian community have any handles we can use to change that? I believe that statistic can be changed. Have you ever been astonished by an act of love that was shown to you? Over the years in my ministry, I've had many people that have done some astonishing things, acts of love, words of encouragement that have made me feel a part of the family. And I didn't feel lonely because I had people who were speaking words of love and encouragement and actions into my life. And if that thing can change my life, it can change the lives of others when we reciprocate that with others. As we look at the ministry of Jesus during this Lenten season, we are reminded of the words and actions that Jesus used that made such a difference in the lives of the people that he touched. And he astonished people by what he said. Think of, for example, first of all, Jesus said to the man that was paralyzed for so many years, he says, "Take up your mat and go home." If you had been that paralyzed man, how would you have responded to an instruction like that? You haven't been able to walk for years. How can he have the audacity to tell me to get up and walk? Walk, he said, mind you, walk and go home. Or think of the astonished man with the shriveled hand. And Jesus looked at him and said, "Stretch out your hand." Well, doesn't Jesus know that he hasn't been able to do anything with that hand for a very long time? Or probably the most astonishing words Jesus ever spoke was to his friend Lazarus, who was in the grave for several days already. And Jesus says, "Come forth." And think how astonishing those words were to the crowd that heard him, because they know he's in the tomb. And Jesus says, "Come forth." And think of how astonished the Samaritan woman was when Jesus broke all cultural conventions and spoke with her, because Jews aren't supposed to have any kinds of dealings or conversations with Samaritans. And yet Jesus not only converses with her, he says, "Will you give me a drink?" From a Samaritan, some of those kind of people. And the amazing thing is that through that conversation with that woman, they even were able to talk about spiritual things. So these are examples of how Christ's love brought hope to these people. Think of the results of his words and actions in the lives of these people. The man who was paralyzed could now walk and once again become independent. He didn't have to look to family and friends to provide for his needs. Lazarus' family was restored to them because now he could be with his sisters again and other friends that he knew. The Samaritan's woman's sense of worth was restored, and to such an extent that she went back to the village and gave a testimony, and they believed her and also believed in Jesus as a result of her testimony, all through a conversation, through simple words. And each page of the Gospels is filled with the encounters of Christ's astonishing love. And through that love, he brought hope to troubled lives. And during these days of Lent, we also want to consider the final word that Jesus spoke around the cross. And they too refer the astonishing love of Jesus. Think of how astonished the Roman soldiers must have been who were standing beneath the cross. They were the very ones who had mocked him, tortured him, drove nails into his hands and feet, gambled for his clothing. Yet in spite of all that they did to him, how they mocked him and all of that, they heard him say words that completely shocked them. They had heard lots of curses before, but here Jesus stands up, stands there on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. Can't you just imagine how shocked those soldiers must have been to hear such words from the very one who was dying on the cross, and they were the ones that had put him there? Consider the thief who was crucified next to Jesus. According to the gospel, there were two thieves. One thief cursed Jesus. The other one asked mercy. After a lifetime of deception and sinful choices, the one thief asked for mercy. And the words that Jesus told him shocked him, astonished him. Jesus said to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And doesn't Jesus know how the kind of life he had lived? But Jesus still says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Both of these men had the opportunity of accepting the grace and forgiveness of Jesus, but only one responded, and he received that gift of being with Christ in paradise. Then consider Jesus' final encounter with his mother, Mary. He is hanging there on the cross, writhing in pain. And as he looks down from the cross, he can see his mother just with bewilderment and filled with grief and sorrow, anguish. And she is standing by his beloved disciple, John. His heart goes out to her. And he knows that she will be very much alone because Jesus' brother still had not acknowledged who Jesus was. And once again, Jesus displays his astonishing, supportive love from the cross. He looks at John and says, "John, dear woman, here's your son." And to John, he says, "Here is your mother." And the Bible tells us from that day forward, Mary lived in the house of Jesus. And during this season, we celebrate the amazing demonstration of Jesus' love through the very last breath that he took. And when we see and hear, recall Jesus' words from the cross, we see his amazing forgiveness, his acceptance, his support, and his love for others. And the words that Jesus spoke from the cross are words that we all need to hear and to appropriate in our own lives. We have those same needs. We need Jesus' forgiveness. We need his acceptance. We need his support and encouragement today. So don't leave here today without experiencing these gifts of grace that flow from Jesus Christ right today. So allow Jesus Christ to meet your needs in this service today. So what happens when in our lives when we hear and appropriate those words of Jesus? Something wonderful happens in our lives. We experience a hope that nothing else but Jesus Christ can bring into our lives. In Romans 5:5, the apostle tells us, and hope doesn't disappoint us because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom he has given us. And because of Christ's love, that love has been poured into our hearts, that same love can be demonstrated through us. We can now bring hope to our pain-filled world, to our lonely world, to our desperate and chaotic world. We can bring hope. But let's think about the pain that is so evident in our world today. Think of the pain that is being experienced by Danushka Wickramasinghe. We were shocked this past week by the brutal and horrific slayings that rocked the Ottawa area suburb. And think of the pain that this man must be feeling to think that he lost his wife, his 4 children, and among them 2.5-month-old baby. And another man's life was taken as well, a man newly come from Sri Lanka, and he left behind a wife and 2 children. And the 19-year-old student that they invited into their home because he was needy, he needed a place. And just the week before, they helped him celebrate his 19th birthday. And in spite of all that this young man did to his family, he still had empathy for them, for that young lad, and for what's going to happen to him. And we wonder, what is in the minds of people that can commit such terrible, terrible crimes? Is it anger, revenge for something that has been done to them by a person or an institution? Has the person finally snapped because they can no longer control their lives? But incidents like this pinpoint the idea that people are going through a lot of struggles and conflicts that they cannot cope with, and so they take it out on other people. It is an indication of so much inner pain, and many have given up hope that their lives could ever be better. So all around us are persons with tremendous pain, tremendous struggles, tremendous loneliness. Is there anything that we can do? I mentioned that Dina and I had attended the Toronto Prayer Breakfast. This is a gathering of about 100 people, pastors, ministry leaders, members of Toronto's, from business, from government, arts and entertainment, education, and media sector. These all get together to pray for our city and community. Among the guests that was invited to give a brief challenge was our mayor, Olivia Chow. And she shared her personal journey of how she came to Canada as an immigrant when she was 13 years old. She lived in St. Jamestown, a very poor, rough area of our city, and in a very abusive home where her father continually abused her mother. And so she grew up in a very dysfunctional family. And a friend invited her to the Chinese Baptist Bible camp. And there she heard the gospel. She responded to the gospel, was baptized, and continued her walk with God. And she taught Sunday school in the church. And she soon recognized there were a lot of needy people that she wanted to be able to serve. And she worked through the church at first. And then she found ways of doing things in the community to help the needy and needy people that were in the community. She wanted to improve the conditions of our city. And something that really moved her back in the 70s was the plight of the Vietnamese boat people. When they came, they fled from Vietnam after the war, and they came here in the 70s. And that really touched her heart. And she said, I've got to do something about these people that are suffering. And so that started her on a lifetime of activism and community organizing. And she had the creed that she believed that if she was going to be faithful to give good news to the poor, that she had to really dedicate her life to those purposes. And so she said that this desire to do something for the poor had to be in the foreground, not in the background of her life's landscape. And over time, she realized the calling into politics, where she would have a greater opportunity to make changes in the city and in the lives of people. And so at this prayer breakfast, she gave an impassioned appeal for us to do more for the immigrants, for those who are hungry, for those who are homeless. because thousands are fleeing from their countries and coming here, and they need a safe home, and they need a new beginning in Canada. And what will we as the Christian community do is the question that she left us with. What are we going to do as a Christian community? And then she introduced another lady. She introduced Sandra Ryan. And Sandra Ryan is the global missions pastor at the People's Church. And she opened with this rather astonishing statement, too, that came out of that session. She said, all of us are asylum seekers. All of us are asylum seekers. Did you ever think that you were an asylum seeker? She said, just think about it. All of us seek for refuge. We seek for a home. We seek to belong to a group of people. So we all look for that, and that is what these people who are coming to the city are looking for a place of refuge, a place of belonging. And so we want to find acceptance. And at the People's Church, they decided they want to do something to make a difference. And so they have what they call the People's House. And this house provides a safe home for approximately 8 to 14 refugees at a time, otherwise have a safe place to stay in Toronto. And that's one example of a church doing something to reach out to the stranger and immigrant in our community. Olivia Chow also invited another person to share with us, Lily Chang. She's the Toronto City Councillor for the area of Willowdale, just right close to us here. And she's the one that astonished us with that statement that Canada, or that Toronto, is the loneliest city in Canada. And that is a statistic. She encouraged us, we have to change. And she has been trying to do her part in changing this statistics of our city. And she has been involved in Christian ministry. She served as an interim pastor. She served as the community pastor at People's Church before she entered politics. And now as a counselor, she is developing all kinds of programs in the Willowdale area to meet the needs of people. And she likes to get the community involved, and she's getting them involved in planning and organizing things for youth, for adults, for immigrants, all of these things so that the needs of these people can be met. And isn't it encouraging to have someone on our city council that has that kind of passion for people like that in our city? Well, we here at Fairview, we have been doing some things, and we rejoice about those. Our ministries group has incorporated Bags of Blessing, where we provide food to the food bank, and we had a clothing drive at Christmas time. And also at Christmas time, we gave food to the North York Harvest Food Bank. These are ways that we have tried to do something in our community. And last week, we turned our thoughts to Moldova and Ukraine. And we were reminded of the refugees that are going into that country to find refuge, and all of the programs that the church where Sergei is pastoring, ministering to people who are displaced and exploited. And they have a ministry to those people. So when people are struggling, what do they need? Is giving Bible verses enough? That's good. But when we think of how Jesus dealt with struggling people, there were a lot of love and actions in his words. So how can we show others that we care about what they are going through? And also Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:20 gives us some directive. He says, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. And I particularly like the first part of this verse. We are Christ's ambassadors because God is making his appeal through us. He has given us his love. He has given us his grace. Now we are to be channels of that love and grace. You see, people do need Bible verses, but they need Bible verses with skin on, with action. People that show love and concern behind the words and scriptures that they share. And so they need words, also need to see. See, Jesus astonished people by understanding he demonstrated. He forgave those who had wounded him and rejected him. He accepted a repentant thief into the kingdom. He supported his mother, even while suffering excruciating pain and sacrificing himself for all humanity. Question for us today is, how can we astonish people with our demonstrations of love and understanding? Let's make it our task as ambassadors of Christ this week to demonstrate astonishing love in our lives, through our lives. May our church become known as a community of hope, a place where Christ's forgiveness, acceptance, and support are abundantly evident. So this week, whether we encounter a friend who is experiencing sickness or dealing with the death of a loved one, or a family member making bad choices that need some encouragement and help, or someone who is simply feeling so alone in our city. Each of us, if we'll look for it, has the opportunity and privilege of sharing Christ's astonishing love with them. And it can be done in some very simple ways. John Ortberg tells about a little girl with a palate. And when she started school, made it clear she looked different than the other children, with her misshapen lip, her crooked nose, her lopsided teeth, and garbled speech. So when her classmates asked, "What happened to your lip?" she would tell them, well, she had fallen and cut her lip on a piece of glass. To her, it seemed more acceptable to have suffered from an accident than from having been born that way. And she was convinced that no one outside of her family could love her. There was, however, a teacher in the second grade that all the children adored. Her name was Mrs. Leonard. She was short, round, happy, a sparkling personality. Annually at that school, they had a hearing test. And Miss Leonard gave the test to all the children. And finally, it was this little girl's turn for the hearing test. And what would happen, they would stand outside the door and put their ear to the and the teacher would be at her desk and whisper a sentence, and they had to repeat it. And she might whisper something like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" And so finally, it was this little girl's turn to hear words whispered to her, to see how her hearing was. And God must have put into the mind and heart of this teacher to say the statement that she did to this little girl. Here were her words that she whispered. "I wish you were my little girl. I wish you were my little girl." She echoed those words back. But those simple but astonishing words from a sensitive, understanding teacher changed that little girl's life. Her entire life was changed by 7 simple, astonishing words of love. And And by each of us using the opportunities to share words and or deeds, we can help to bring hope in the situations that we are dealing with. By each of us making a concerted effort to reach out to others with simple but astonishing words of love and hope, we will begin to change the statistics of our city of being the loneliest city in Canada to being the most welcoming city in Canada. God help us do that. Amen.